To get us some perspective, we are now being joined by Dr. Glilot from Norway. He's a professor of international relations at the University of Southeastern Norway and an editor at the Russia and Global Affairs Journal. Thank you so much for joining us on this broadcast.
Oh, thank you for having me on.
You know, it was widely believed that after the killing of the Hezbollah chief, we might see some depleted attacks when it comes to Israel. But Hezbollah has recently claimed that it has targeted two positions in the suburbs of Tel Aviv, of all places. How do you assess that?
Well, I don't think Hezbollah is planning to give up in this fight. So I think you will probably continue to see escalation continuing on both sides. So. I think this idea that killing the leaders would merely end the resistance, I don't think is likely at all. I think they are able to replace the leadership quite quickly. And the way I see at least situation is there's no one talking about capitulating at this point.
Dr. Deason, it's interesting you say that decimating the leadership of Hezbollah is not going to mean that the war is going to come to an end, or the fighting would rather end. So in that case, when Israel claims that the end of Hezbollah and the end of Hamas in Gaza is going to be the end of war, then I have to ask, when is the war going to end?
Well, it's hard to say. Again, I think what Hamas and Hezbollah represents is an idea. That is, I think it becomes very reductionist to merely represent them as terrorist organizations, because they are resisting what they see to be an illegitimate political solution in Palestine. So I don't see really an end to the war. Traditionally or historically, Israel has not gone for the full defeat of an adversary. Instead, they tend to pursue this policy, which is often referred to as mowing the lawn. And this is exactly because they don't pursue any permanent political solutions. Because of this, they are required, the way they see it, to periodically weaken their adversaries, which means every now and then launch military operation against enemies to reduce their military capabilities, but also devastate them economically, which is why Israel has a tendency to strike both military as well as civilian targets. So as long as there's no willingness to pursue a political settlement with any of its adversaries, this is the general tactic. That is, every few years, they mow the lawn, which means to destroy and weaken adversaries. But again, this is not going to solve the problem. It's merely going to delay and continue the hostilities. And in this instance, due to the severity of these bombing campaigns, it's only going to fuel more resentment, not just in Palestine, but also in Lebanon, which will just add recruitment and external finance for these groups.
Right. And speaking of political settlement, U.S. State Secretary Antony Blinken is headed to Israel. He's going to sit down with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu shortly. Should one be optimistic?
No. I think that the Americans are genuine, that they would like this war to dial down. They are very concerned that it's escalating, especially the risk of pulling in Iran. This is something they're very worried about. But they're not so worried that they're willing to say no to Israel. There's a lot of talk about taking a tougher line on Israel, but so far this hasn't actually manifested itself in any actual actions, as we now see that the United States could compel the Israelis to accept a ceasefire by limiting or even cutting off the weapons to Israel. Keep in mind that these are being fought mostly with American weapons, so the Americans are deeply involved in this. So I think at the moment they're willing to allow the Israelis to continue weakening adversaries, or mowing the lawn, as they say, while the U.S. financed this, but meanwhile at the same time pushing openly, at least for diplomacy and a ceasefire, to have it both ways, as it is.
Right. Dr. Deason, before I let you go, as you were saying, U.S. Secretary of State is heading to Israel. But at a time like this, Iran became a member of BRICS, and now it's in Kazan. It's representative. And it's in Kazan, that's Russia, another adversary of the West. What do you make of this?
Well, if there would be any Israeli strikes on Iran now, it could be seen as being somewhat symbolic in terms of striking this bloc of countries which are coming together. But it also has to be pointed out that the BRICS countries aren't a military alliance. If anything, they're economic grouping, which consists of many countries which are adversaries. So you can have, China, India, United Arab Emirates, Iran. There's a lot of countries who have conflicts and tensions with each other. So, this grouping is intended to use economic cooperation to mitigate some of the political differences. But obviously, there is a sense, at least in the West, that this is threatening to unseat centuries of Western dominance. So there is an antagonistic view on this, and it wouldn't surprise me, I guess, if Israel would choose to strike Iran during this meeting in Kazan, as the Russians, the Chinese, and the Iranians are coming closer and closer together, largely to a large extent pushed by the United States, which is fueling a war, or at least threatening all of these major powers. So this is often referred to as Kissinger's worst nightmare, as a U.S. objective have always been to keep these giants away from each other, not incentivize them to harmonize their security interest and economic infrastructure.
Right, Dr. Deason, you make a very interesting point there. Thank you so much for joining us and unpacking so much with us in West Asia.
My pleasure.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.